Hello and welcome to Legalbytes. If you're new here, my name is Alita. I'm a lawyer licensed in California and DC, and on this channel, we explain the law one bite at a time. We don't give legal advice, but we do talk about how the law works and try to look into our crystal ball to see how things might turn out. If you're enjoying this on YouTube, we'd love it if you could like the video, subscribe to the channel, share it with friends, all the great YouTube-y stuff. And if you want to listen while out and about, we're now offering our live streams in podcast form where you can leave a rating and review. Links are in the description below, as well as to our clips channel where you can find some of the best clips taken from our live streams. Otherwise, if you want to catch me elsewhere, you can find me on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. And if you want to support the channel, you can do so on Locals, Patreon, or by becoming a YouTube member, or by buying some really awesome Legalbytes merch. Again, all links are in the description below. And with that said, let's get into it.
All right, folks, here we go. Wait a minute. There we go. We've got the IndyCam set up. We are back in the studio. We are officially studio office. Whatever, same. We are back home now. So we are joined by all of the little fur buddies. Holmes is actually right here. You can't see him. He's just off camera, but he'll show up at some point. And at some point, Mavi will come in and wreak her usual chaos. So I hope you guys are doing well. Happy Monday. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Wherever you are, I hope it's been a good one. I hope you had a good weekend. I had a good one. Yesterday was just all flying. So to get back home. But now we're back. We're in the swing of things, and I'm going to start getting some recaps out for you guys in addition to the daily live streams ASAP for this, because I know not everybody can watch the full trial, even if people can pop in here and there. Not everyone can watch the full thing. So yeah, those recaps will be coming. Sorry that they're delayed. Yeah, you guys can tell I'm a little bit sick too, so it's like I'm trying to also maintain some rest. Anyhow, with all of that said, I'm excited to get on with day 3. The court once again has they have started a little bit early. This judge likes to just get going as soon as she sees that everybody's there. She doesn't wait for the 9 a.m. start time. So we're a little bit behind it now, but like I said in the chat, this is we'll get caught up very, very quickly. Alrighty. Okay. Before we get to the actual testimony, Tony P, thank you so much for gifting 1 Legalbytes membership. Rob P, you've been gifted a membership by Tony P. So welcome back to Bite Club. Love to see it. Very, very kind and generous of you, Tony. Thank you so much. And Nick Wilson also rejoined as a member. And Austin SA, thanks so much for the super chat. Talk to an attorney friend in ABQ. You mean Albuquerque. Crazy Dresser is a paralegal named Carmela Cisneros. HDR's attorney is a one-man show for DWI and personal injury. Okay. So the lady who on day 1 was wearing like what looked like a tiara, and she's drawn a lot of commentary. Okay, so maybe she is a paralegal. On day 2, I was thinking that she was a junior attorney because of how she was able to go up and like whisper in his ear about something. That's usually not something that a paralegal is necessarily going to do during a trial. But no, I guess she in fact is a paralegal. So now we've got some information on that. Thank you so much, Austin SA. And 1 member chat here from Nick Wilson, member for 17 months. I'm back. Come on, many caused some chaos. I think you mean Mavi. Yes. I'm sure that's just not a correct. Yes, she will definitely be back. And of course, wreaking total havoc, as we like to say, since the Rittenhouse trial. All right, folks, let's get started, shall we? Oh, that's not the right one. This is the right one. Okay, get out of here, other thing. Okay, cool. Let's get started, guys. They're started with a whole new witness. So we are finished with the production unit manager who was testifying yesterday on day 2. And then there was a question either from the jury or for the jury. We have not found out anything about what that was or what the question was, what the answer was. But I don't know. I haven't heard anything on this at all. So we might just have to ignore it, unfortunately. All right, let's get started.
The state calls Bryce Ziggler.
Face the judge and raise your right hand.
Do you swear affirm under penalty of law that the testimony you'll give in this case will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
And as always,
All right,
witness is
have
going to be in a
seat, talk
pin
into the
chat.
microphone.
Mr. Zig, oh. Is your microphone on?
Yes.
Okay. Mr. Ziggler, go ahead and just state your full name for the record.
Thank you. Finally.
My name is Bryce Ziggler. First name spelled Bryce. Last name spelled Ziegler.
Okay.
Mr. Ziggler, how are you currently employed?
I'm currently employed by the Federal Bureau of Investigation
Ooh.
within the Laboratory Division, specifically within the Firearms and Toolmarks Unit.
Can you give the jury a summary of your educational background and training?
I received a Bachelor's of Science in Forensic Science from the Pennsylvania State University.
And how long have you worked for the FBI?
Since the summer of 2011.
I was going to say,
And
I don't know how many
since
times he's testified.
2011, what positions have you held at the FBI?
I was initially hired into one of the DNA units at the laboratory, and I essentially worked as what's called a technician in that discipline. So I essentially did the majority of the DNA processing operations, but then a examiner would come in, review my work, review the profiles, and take it from there. In 2015, I transferred to the Firearms Toolmarks unit, which is where I am now. And I was also promoted to a forensic examiner. So in this current position, I receive evidence that's related to my discipline. I perform the requested examinations on those items of evidence, and I issue the results in a formal laboratory report. And also, if I'm called to, I can testify to those results.
And sir, other than your
Your cell phone
undergraduate
is on.
degree, what kind of training
In the
do
courtroom.
you have in the area of firearms and tool marks?
In order to become a qualified forensic examiner in this discipline, I had to complete what's called the Forensic Examiner Training Program. And that program, it's developed and implemented by the FBI lab, and it's specific to each particular unit. So I had to complete the program specific for firearms and tool marks. And this program, so I was assigned a mentor, and I was also given a training manual. So this mentor kind of guided me through the process, reviewed tasks in that training manual with me. And to essentially complete that process, I had to pass a series of written examinations, oral board exercises, practical competency tests, as well as moot court exercises.
Thank you, sir. And have you ever been qualified as an expert?
In court?
In court, yes.
Yes, I have.
And in what areas have you been qualified as an expert?
Some of those are general firearms examinations. Sometimes it's firearms identification. So that's the microscopic comparison of fired ammunition components back to firearms. I've also been qualified in shooting incident reconstruction.
And in terms of shooting incident reconstruction, did you do that kind of work in this case?
No, I did not.
And I apologize. We were having a technical difficulty here. In terms of the work that you did on this case, what areas of expertise have you been qualified as an expert in that apply to this
She's
case?
qualifying him as an expert.
Sure. I would say those two areas are the examination of firearms and also firearms identification.
Okay, thank you, sir. We will ask the court to recognize, well, you know what, let me pause. Have you testified before?
Yes, I have.
And have you been qualified as an expert in other courts?
Yes, I
asked
have.
And how many other courts have qualified you as an expert?
13.
And are those all federal courts or state courts?
10 of those are federal, 3 were state.
Okay, thank you. I would ask the court to recognize Mr. Ziggler as an expert in firearms examination and firearms,
Identification.
thank you, identification.
All right. You are recognized as an expert in examination of firearms and firearm identification.
Now, it's okay, thanks, you can have a seat. In this
Wondering-
particular case,
Sorry, this guy that's been standing there behind her that entire time. I think he's their tech guy or something. You know, they've had some tech issues there, but it's so unnerving having this guy standing behind her like some bouncer. I'm glad she waved him off at some point during this examination.
were you provided certain items of evidence for testing?
Yes, I was.
And approximately how many items of evidence were you provided for testing?
That's difficult to approximate because I was given a certain number of item numbers, but those item numbers may have, for example, 30 cartridges. So I believe that item numbers, I would say maybe around 50 items. But again, that could mean a much larger set of items.
Were you provided a firearm to examine in this case?
Yes, I was.
And did you have any understanding where that firearm came from?
I don't have personal knowledge of where the items of evidence are submitted from. They are generally submitted with some information that gets populated into our laboratory database. So I do have a description of that. That information gets populated into my lab report, but I don't have direct knowledge of where those items came from.
So what was your understanding, and I appreciate your qualification there, what was your understanding of where the firearm in this case came from that you administered some testing on?
So in this case, it was just labeled as a revolver. There was no description as to, for example, no address where that firearm was collected from.
That's interesting.
You weren't given any information about whether it was collected from a movie set or whether it was a prop being used by an actor?
Your Honor, I'm going to object to leading.
That's leading.
I actually don't think that is leading.
Yeah, that is leading. The reason why she's getting to that though is because she wants to flag to the jury that he wasn't biased in his reporting here one way or another. This having been coming from a movie set or having anything to do with Alec Baldwin, for example.
Overruled.
I don't have that information.
Huh,
Okay.
That was overruled. Okay.
I'm going to show you, what I have marked as State's Exhibit 97. May I approach? Do you recognize that?
Yes, I do.
What is
Your Honor,
that?
may I see that?
Good call. Because, you know, some disclosures may be made of personal information. By the way, Debbie Faison Cook, thanks so much for
Mr.
gifting
Ziggler,
another
what
membership.
did I
Very
just
kind and
show you?
generous of you.
That is a photograph of the revolver that was submitted to my laboratory for examination.
And Shona M72, welcome to Bike Club.
Is this a revolver that you did testing on?
Yes, it is.
Your Honor, I'm going to move for the admission of State's Exhibit 97 and ask for permission to publish.
No objection.
All right, States 97 is admitted. You may publish. It was on my screen before.
And can I ask, is there any way for me to only publish to that monitor so that I don't have to walk back and forth? Just to his monitor so that it only goes to his and doesn't go to everybody else's when I'm going through the exhibits.
No, if it's published, well. You mean to recognize it?
Correct.
We would have to keep turning it on and off,
Okay.
or else you could, yeah, that's what we'd have to do.
Okay. Why don't we just take a minute and let me see if I can get an agreement so that we don't have to do that.
Okay.
All right.
showing opposing counsel what you intend to publish. Good move. I think the defense is going to be super on this now from here on out after that disclosure of his client's phone number and his phone number. Although his phone number is probably it could very well be listed on there on his firm website. But yeah, there's been some comments in the chat about the paralegal. I think this is a different paralegal who's there today. This appears to be an entirely different person. So no idea what happened. I think at this point she's starting to show him her summer photos from vacation. Taking some time, burning some daylight hours.
The state will move for the admission and permission to publish throughout Mr. Ziggler's testimony of State's Exhibit 97, 97A, 98, 99, 100, 101, 102, 103, 104, 105, 106, 107, 108, 109, 110.
So is it 97A through 110? Did you skip anything?
97, 97A, and then 98 through 110.
No
Any
objection,
objection?
Your Honor.
All right, states 97 through 110 are admitted.
Every time we unplug it. All right, Mr. Ziggler, can we go ahead and put it up on the screen? Mr. Ziggler, tell us a little bit about this firearm that was provided to you. What kind of a gun is it? And just generally speaking, how does a gun like this operate?
So this is an image, a photograph of the revolver that was submitted. And this is a single action revolver. So that means that the hammer must be manually cocked by the shooter every time that the shooter intends to fire. So some revolvers, if you pull the trigger, it will do the work of cocking the hammer for you and releasing the hammer. This type of firearm does not have that ability. The shooter must physically cock the hammer each time. Is this a touchscreen by chance? Okay. So to point out a few key areas of this firearm, the portion on the left, don't believe him.
He's going to come help you.
Thank you. So the portion on the left in this photograph is the barrel. Towards the center, we have the cylinder. This back portion here is the hammer. We have the trigger near the bottom. And this wooden piece is the grip. So this is where you would hold the firearm. Clear this out. So basically, in order to get this firearm to function, you would have to load cartridges into the cylinder. This can be accomplished two ways. You can't see it in this photograph, but on the opposite side is what's called a loading gate. You can open and you then have access to the cylinder. So you can load each cartridge one at a time, rotating the cylinder until you have as many cartridges as you desire. You could also remove this pin here, remove the cylinder from the firearm and load it that way. But regardless, once you load the cylinder, you must manually cock the hammer all the way to the rear. And then at this point, this firearm will be ready to fire. So a pull of the trigger would release the firearm, or excuse me, the hammer. The hammer has a firing pin that's fixed to the hammer. So as the hammer falls, the firing pin would strike the primer of the cartridge and fire that cartridge.
Oh.
Can you give us a quick?
So sorry, I know we're already behind, but this is an interesting point here because he basically says, you pull the hammer all the way back and then you let it go. It strikes the primer, sends the bullet out. That matches basically exactly what Alec Baldwin said in his interview with George Stephanopoulos. I know in all of my videos that I've made on this case, I'm pretty sure whether it's Hannah Gutierrez-Reed or Alec Baldwin, I'm pretty sure in every single one I've I've used that clip of that interview of him saying, I pulled the hammer back all the way and let it go, and then the gun went off. So that's, I mean, that basically is a 1-to-1 fit with what Alec Baldwin said he did, and that basically means shooting a person. So I've always said the gun went off or he pulled the trigger. Either way, he did end up shooting a person. But anyway, but that's going to be very interesting for Alec Baldwin's case as well, and they're going to have to contend with that.
Quick description about the notches on the hammer and the different hammer positions.
Yes, so as you would cock this hammer, it has several safety notches by design. So as you cock it, you're going to hear a series of clicks, and those are the safety notches. So as you start to cock it, you're going to hear your first click. That's the quarter cock notch. If you continue to cock it, you'll hear your second click. That's the half cock notch. And if you cock it all the way, you'll hear the third click, and that's when it's in its fully cocked position. So those intermediate two cocking positions, they serve to do two things. Number one, when the hammer is completely at rest or not cocked at all, the firing pin actually protrudes inside the frame. So it's very difficult to see here, but in between this gap, between the cylinder and the frame, you would actually be able to see the firing pin sticking out. So as you start to cock it, it starts to remove the firing pin from protruding. So we don't want the firing pin making contact with the cartridges when we don't want it to. So it starts to retract the firing pin. And also, if I'm cocking the hammer and my thumb slips off the hammer, you would expect that it's going to catch in one of those two safety notches. So this is to prevent the hammer from falling unless you want it to. So really, this firearm is only designed to fire when the hammer is in its fully cocked position.
In terms of well, let me ask you this, the half cock notch, so that's going to be the second click that you hear when you're cocking the hammer, is that correct?
Correct.
Is there anything particular about the half cock position other than it being a safety?
Can you elaborate?
Sure. What position does the hammer have to be in order to load this gun with ammunition?
I understand. So you have to have the hammer retracted to a certain point to allow the cylinder to rotate freely. So there's a part, and it's on the inside here, called the cylinder stop, and that cylinder stop does not unlock until the hammer is pulled back to a certain point. So once it's pulled back to a certain degree, you can freely rotate the cylinder to load it with as many cartridges as you desire.
So in order to load and unload this gun, if you don't remove the pin and remove the cylinder, it has to be in the half cock position.
I'm not sure if it's somewhere between the quarter and the half cock, but it is in that intermediate area, yes.
So once you get it into the half cock position, what do you have to do to load it?
So I'll clear this out. Again, on the other side, there's a loading gate that you can open, and you then have access to the cylinder. So you can load it that way or remove the cylinder itself.
How many cylinder positions do you have access to when you open that loading gate?
Only one at a time. So you must manually rotate the cylinder and continue to load a single cartridge at a time.
So for those of us that are familiar with revolvers where you push a button and the entire cylinder kind of rolls out and you can load and unload that way, does this gun work that way?
No, those are going to be your more modern style revolvers.
If you noticed when you received this gun and you examined this gun, did this gun appear to be very old or relatively new, or were you not able to tell?
I'm not able to tell its age now.
Okay. Who is the manufacturer?
Sir, can you please stop using the word cocked because the chat is having a hard time with it? I see you guys.
Of this revolver?
The trade name is Pieta. It's an Italian company.
And do you know anything about Pieta and what they do, what they make?
I do know they have product lines they create new firearms that are essentially replicas of older firearms.
Is this a replica?
It's a replica in that it's an old design, but it's still a functioning firearm.
Now, if the hammer, let's talk about kind of hypothetically. Let's assume that this gun is fully loaded with live ammunition. And we have the hammer in its resting position, so it's fully down. Is that the position it's in this photo?
Yes, it appears so.
So how is this gun designed in terms of safety with regard to possible accidental discharges when the hammer is in the fully rested position?
Right. So when the hammer is fully forward, as I mentioned earlier, the firing pin actually protrudes inside the frame. So if you have the cylinder fully loaded and the hammer is at rest on a chamber that has a live cartridge in it, that firing pin is actually sitting on the primer of that cartridge.
So good.
So
It can't
if
go
I were
off.
either to strike the hammer or if I were to drop it and it landed on the hammer, it's going to fire that cartridge. So if
Oh,
you hit the
geez.
hammer with enough force, it will detonate that primer in that position. And that's part of the design of this firearm. That's just how these are made. And if you were to look at the owner's manual, which this is one thing I did as part of my exam, you would actually see warnings not to carry this firearm with the hammer at rest on a loaded chamber. So a lot of times it's actually advised that you load one less cartridge in the cylinder. So you have one empty chamber, and that's how it's carried with the hammer forward on that chamber. So these are recommendations in the owner's manual. So this isn't some phenomenon. This is something that's known about the design of these firearms.
And what kind of testing did you perform on this firearm?
So initially I did a function evaluation just to make sure it appeared that, there weren't any odd modifications, that it was functioning correctly. After that, I was requested to do some microscopic comparisons, as I was also submitted a fired bullet and a fired cartridge case. And then the last type of testing I did on this particular gun is what's called accidental discharge testing. So essentially the goal of that test is to see if I can get this firearm to function without pulling the trigger.
So the first set of testing that you mentioned, what did that entail?
So function examination is basically, I need to inspect the firearm for safety purposes. Keep in mind, I've never seen this firearm before when I first opened the box. So I don't know what condition it's been in. I don't know how old it is. I don't know how well it's been taken care of. So eventually I'm going to want to test fire that gun. So I need to make sure I feel that it's safe to fire, so I don't have some catastrophic failure while I do so. Once I determine that it is safe to fire, I will physically take the gun to one of two locations in the FBI lab, and I will load it with ammunition from the laboratory and actually test fire the gun.
And did you test fire this gun?
Yes, I did.
Approximately how many rounds of ammunition did you fire out of this gun?
May I refer to my report?
Sure.
I physically fired this gun 12 times. So as a result of that, I retained the fired bullet and fired cartridge cases that I produced during that test firing. And I also collected some other cartridge cases as a product of the testing that I did. So these would be cartridge cases that I collected during the accidental discharge testing.
And the rounds that you fired, the 12 rounds that you fired out of this gun, were they evidence rounds or were those rounds that were supplied by the FBI?
They were FBI cartridges, and then once I fire them in the evidence firearm, they become what's called secondary evidence. And essentially, if I have to conduct microscopic comparisons at a later point, that secondary evidence, they now become my knowns. I know they came from that firearm because I physically shot it and collected those items.
All right, thank you. Tell us about the second group of testing that you did.
Right, that was the microscopic comparisons. So again, I was submitted a fired bullet and a fired cartridge case. And essentially I was asked to determine if, in my opinion, I could determine if those two items were fired by this particular revolver.
Okay, and let me back you up for a moment. Did you examine rounds of ammunition as a part of your forensic examination in this case?
Yes, I did.
And did you examine dummy rounds?
Yes, I did.
Did you examine live rounds?
Yes.
Did you examine live rounds? Well, did you examine live rounds that you understood to be provided by someone named Seth Kinney?
Yes, there were some cartridges that were submitted and they were declared to be live rounds as they were submitted.
Did you examine live ammunition that came from a location that you were notified was 126 Monroe Street?
Your Honor, I would object to leading.
I'm not leading, I'm just asking him a direct question.
May I review my...
Sure.
Thank you. Yes, I do have some item numbers that have that address in their item description.
Did you also examine live ammunition that came from the set of the movie Rust?
Yes, I did.
And when you examined that ammunition, what did that entail?
So the evaluation of the ammunition kind of took place in a couple different phases. So first, I just looked at the physical characteristics. So I evaluated its appearance from the outside. And based on that, I started to segregate these types of ammunition into groups just based on their physical appearance. So I could put them into groups. For example, some of them appeared to be live cartridges. So I had that group. Some of them appeared to be dummy rounds. And so they may have some physical visual clue that they may be a dummy. So for instance, some of them had holes drilled into the side of them. So I could look into the cartridge and see there was no powder present. Some of them, when you shake them, there are actual BBs inside. So that produces an audible indicator that even though this looks to be a live cartridge, in reality, there's nothing on the inside. So I can shake it, and that's another indicator that that may be a dummy. There were a series of blanks, which a blank does not have a bullet. It still has a primer and gas, but it's not meant to actually fire a projectile. So I started to form these groups just based on their physical characteristics. I then x-rayed all the ammunition because I could hear some of these cartridges it sounded like BBs inside when you shook them. So I wanted to get an idea of just a picture of what was going on inside these cartridges. So again, I took those two pieces of information, sorted them into groups, and then eventually I worked with the contributor to determine which of these cartridges actually need to be disassembled. So we can take out the bullet and we can look inside and see, is there any powder present? Does it look like the primer is active or not? So those were kind of the three phases to sort of determine which categories these cartridges actually fell into.
Okay, and quickly, I'm going to jump you to the accidental discharge testing that you did. Can you summarize for the ladies and gentlemen of the jury what that accidental discharge testing consisted of and why you did that testing?
Right. So again, accidental
Kind of a compound
discharge,
question.
its goal is essentially to determine, can I fire this firearm without pulling the trigger? That's kind of the end goal. And the way we do that is the test is designed to simulate the firearm being bumped or banged into something, just being jostled around, and seeing, can those kind of interactions fire the firearm? So the way we replicate this in the laboratory is I will take the gun and actually strike it with a rawhide mallet on 6 planes. So if you picture picture a box sitting in front of you. The 6 planes would be the front of the box, the rear of the box, the left side, the right side, the top, and the bottom. So those are the 6 planes. So if you kind of picture the revolver and picture how those 6 planes work around that gun, I'm going to go around and strike the firearm in all 6 of those planes with a rawhide mallet. Again, trying to determine if it will actually fire without me touching the trigger.
And specifically, when you're striking the firearm, are you striking the hammer?
That was a part of the testing that I did, yes.
Prior to conducting that testing, did you have any thoughts about whether that could potentially result in damage to the gun?
Right, so this is actually in our standard operating procedures, that this type of testing is potentially disruptive to the firearm. So just kind of generally speaking, if I'm going to do an exam that may destroy or alter the evidence permanently, I would seek out the contributor's permission to do that exam before I actually go and do it. So that is what was done in this case.
Really quick, let me get some questions here. I'm sorry to interrupt it, guys, but there's just a number of questions that are starting to build up, that some of which are going to be more understandable if I answer them now. Anna Wilder, Hannah isn't currently in custody, right? Yeah, she's out on bail. Nomad Purple, we're going to revisit all the cocking in the Baldwin trial. Yes, there will be a lot more cock happening in the Baldwin trial as well. Charlie Gordon, why isn't the defense objecting to relevance? And I'm going to answer that with this. Scottish Jason, this seems more relevant to Baldwin trial than to Hannah's trial. Well, they still, this is relevant to her case even still, because it's part of explaining what may have happened with this gun. The jury still needs to hear it, even if it seems more relevant for Baldwin's trial than for Hannah Gutierrez-Reed's trial, because the jury's still going to want to understand, how did this happen? Like how what was the progression from loading the gun through several people's hands and then ending up it going off, and then a bullet ending up going through Halyna Hutchins and ending up in Joel Souza's shoulder, right? They still need to hear that, even though it's not one of the core arguments, it's still contextual at the very least. But also at the same time, this is very relevant to hear, accidental discharge testing, or any of these other kinds of things, to hear what kinds of other dangers this weapon maybe had along with it by virtue of it being loaded with live rounds. So in other words, I wouldn't be surprised if one of the points that they try to get across is, maybe when Hannah, checked the gun, it was in the quarter cock position or the half cock position before it even got to Alec Baldwin's hand. Alec Baldwin would probably love to see that, because that would really help his case and his culpability, right? Like, it basically was like ready to just, you could drop it and it would go off. But at the same time, I think that what they're pointing out is that, like, along the way from Hannah Gutierrez-Reed's hands over to Alec Baldwin's hands, someone could have just dropped it and it could have gone off and it could have killed somebody. In which case, it would very much be Hannah Gutierrez-Reed's fault for loading it with a live round, assuming that she's the one that loaded it and didn't check it properly, which appears to be the case here. Now, so that's where this relevance comes in. In order for it to be relevant enough to be put in front of the jury, it's a pretty low bar, right, that they have to meet. It just has to be relevant. It doesn't have to be compelling in order to allow this kind of evidence in. So keep that in mind. Dionysia Jaclo, what is the name of the lawyer for the prosecution? Morrissey is her last name. I think it's Karen or Catherine or Kathleen, something along those lines. I can double check, but I think it might be Karen Morrissey. Last name is Morrissey. So that's that. Okay. All right. Let's continue.
So you obtained permission to proceed with that testing,
That's correct.
understanding that it could result in damage.
Yes.
All right. Let's go ahead and, let's go ahead and just briefly describe the striking of the mallet and whether or not at some point there was damage, and kind of what you learned during that test.
So as we're doing this test, we want to test the firearm in all modes of fire that it's capable of. So if I have a rifle, for instance, and say it's semi-automatic and fully automatic, I would do the test in both of those settings. In this case, completely different type of firearm, but I wanted to test this gun in all 4 positions of the hammer. So at rest, quarter cock, half cock, and fully cocked. And essentially as a result of that testing, there were only 2 times that I was able to get this firearm to fire. The first one being when the hammer was at rest on a loaded chamber. So as I previously described to you, the firing pin was sitting directly on the primer. So when I struck the hammer with a mallet, that provided enough force to detonate the primer. So again, that's a known feature of this type of firearm. The second test where this occurred was when the hammer was in the fully cocked position, and I was doing my striking in the 6 planes as I described, and eventually I got to the rear of the firearm, so that back plane, and eventually at some point I struck the hammer with a rawhide mallet, and the hammer actually fell and it detonated the primer. So what happened was some of the internal components of the firearm actually broke to allow that hammer to fall and fire the primed cartridge case. So I previously mentioned those quarter and half cock notches. If the hammer were to fall and there was no damage inside the gun, I would expect that the portion that makes contact with the hammer is called the sear. That sear should have been caught either by the quarter or the half cock notch as the hammer was falling. It should not have been able to fall all the way. So this is what led me to believe that there was some type of damage that occurred within the gun. And eventually I disassembled it to figure out exactly what that damage was.
So the damage that you discovered, just so we're clear, was that damage sustained at the FBI lab?
Yes, it was.
Based on the testing that you did, when this gun was received by the FBI, was it in proper working order?
Yes, so the first exam I did was the function exam. So again, that's making sure it's operating correctly and that it hasn't been modified. During that test, I also examined the safeties. So as it was
That's
received
important.
in that condition, when I went through the function
That
evaluation,
it didn't malfunction
everything
in some
appeared to
way.
be operating correctly. So it functioned normally as it was designed.
So you were able to make it fire in the resting position, correct?
That's correct.
And then did you put it in the quarter cock position?
Yes.
And did you strike it with a mallet?
In that particular case, for the quarter as well as the half cock, I did not need to do the mallet testing.
What kind of testing did you do?
So the quarter and half cock notches are not designed to essentially lock the trigger, put your firearm completely in a safe setting. So again, they're designed that if your finger slips off the hammer, it's going to catch it. So in this type of gun, if your hammer is in either the quarter or the half cock, you can actually squeeze the trigger, and if you squeeze it hard enough, it's going to cock the hammer enough that it releases. So you can still make the hammer fall, even though it's in these 2 intermediate safety positions, if you apply sufficient pressure to the trigger. So I did a variety of testing to determine if I put the hammer in the quarter cock as well as the half cock notch, and I squeeze the trigger hard enough that I allow the hammer to fall, is it even feasible for the hammer to detonate the cartridge? And I determined in both of those positions it was not.
And we understand that the next testing that you did was in the full cock position.
That's correct.
And ultimately, as you predicted, was the gun damaged?
As a result of the testing, yes, it was damaged.
Okay. Let's move to State's Exhibit 97A. Can you tell us what we're looking at here?
Yes, so this is a photograph that I took after the accidental discharge testing was complete. So on the right-hand side, we have the hammer. As I mentioned before, the firing pin is fixed to the hammer. So that's that piece that you see protruding from the hammer. In the top left, this piece is called the cylinder stop. So you can see a piece of that component fractured off. The bottom left here, we have the trigger. And this tiny piece here is what actually fractured off the trigger. Now, as I mentioned before, I explained the quarter and half cock notches. So I'm actually going to point those out to you. On the hammer, these kind of jagged edges, the first one is the quarter cock notch. So as you're cocking the hammer, you hear that first click. That is the sear portion of the trigger, which is now broken, locking into that little recess. Your second click is the half cock notch. So that's that second jagged edge. And then your last click is
It is funny how the captions are censoring the word cock. It's like it must be an automatically generated thing. Sorry.
the actual sear notch. So that's where the trigger is sitting when the hammer is in its fully cocked position. So when I struck the hammer with the mallet, it actually broke off that piece of the trigger that was sitting up against the hammer there.
And is there anything unusual to you in this photo about the full cock notch on the hammer?
So again, this notch here is the full cock notch. So you may notice when looking at this that this notch appears much flatter when you compare it to the other two notches. So it could be that a small portion of this surface was also damaged during the testing. But in addition to that, there are times where the sear notch is just not as pronounced as the other two notches. So I didn't observe any damage myself in this particular area, but it's possible that that area was damaged as well.
And based on your testing, did you form an opinion about whether or not this gun could be fired without the handler pulling the trigger?
So again, the only two times that occurred was with the hammer at rest on a loaded chamber. And the second time, I attributed this to the breakage of internal components. So again, if these parts had not broken, I would expect that the trigger should have been caught by either the quarter or the half cock notch as the hammer was coming forward. So I would not expect this to occur had this breakage not happened.
So just to be clear, did you form an opinion about whether the handler would have to pull the trigger of the gun to make the gun fire?
There we go.
My opinion is that the only reason this occurred is because of the breakage. So in order to move the trigger away from the hammer, that's typically accomplished by pulling the trigger. So in this case, the only way that was possible is because the trigger actually fractured.
Okay.
I'm confused.
So
It's not that clear. Did he or did he not pull the trigger?
in order for you, just so that we're clear, in order for you to make the gun fire without pulling the trigger, when it was in the full cock position, you had to break it.
That's what I had to do in my lab. I can't account for all the other possibilities that may have existed in some hypothetical scenario, but this is the result as I tested it in my laboratory. It
Okay.
would not fire without pulling the trigger in the full cock setting without being broken.
That's what she's trying to get out of him. That's what she's trying to get out of him. That at least in his experience with this particular gun, he could not make it fire when the hammer was fully pulled back. He could not make it fire without using the trigger unless he broke it. That was the only way that it was able to fire, not pulling the trigger and pulling the hammer all the way back. So that's what this prosecutor wanted to get in is, yes, Alec Baldwin had to pull that trigger in order to make that happen. It'll be interesting to see how hard they cross-examine him on this point in this trial. I doubt they're going to go full hog on it. Alec Baldwin's attorneys obviously are going to go really hard on this because that's like a huge part of their case, right? He already admitted to pulling the hammer all the way back and letting it go while pointing it at Halyna Hutchins. So that's that was a big point right there.
Thank you. Let's move to State's Exhibit 98. Can you tell us what we're looking at here?
Yes, this is a photograph of the fired bullet that was submitted for comparison.
And can you describe to us in a little bit more detail what we're seeing in this photo?
This is the lead bullet that was submitted. It's very damaged. So typically when I look at a fired bullet, I would expect to see nice areas that are engraved with the negative impression of the barrel. So I'd expect to see, for example, deep lines that define what we call the rifling. And in this case, I don't see that. I just see a series of abrasions on the outside of this bullet. So essentially, whatever this bullet came into contact with, it basically damaged the exterior surface so greatly that the information that was left behind from the barrel is gone.
When you're talking about what the bullet came in contact with, I just want to be clear. Are you talking about what the bullet came in contact with after it left the barrel of the gun?
That's correct.
State's Exhibit 99. Explain to us what we're looking at here.
So these are just additional images of the same fired bullet. So I took these using my microscope. So they're a little bit higher magnification. And basically in both of these photos, the bullet is pointing to the left. So you're looking at the image of the left, you're looking at all of the damage and abrasions that were present on that bullet when I received it. And the image on the right is similar to the one you saw on the previous slide, where it doesn't have the deep gouges in different directions, but the rifling is still virtually gone from this bullet.
Can you tell us what caliber this bullet is?
When we receive fired bullets, the only way we can estimate the caliber is based on the diameter. So I can measure the diameter of the bullet and also the bullet weight. So for those two items, they were very close between a 44 caliber and a 45 caliber bullet. So I classified it as either a 44 or 45 caliber bullet.
Can you explain to us why a 45 caliber bullet, by the time it gets to you, may have a different diameter and weight?
Sure. So this projectile is lead, which is a relatively soft material. Most modern bullets are going to have a harder jacketing material. So it's going to have a lead core with a harder jacket around it. The most common type is going to be copper. And that harder material is going to protect the lead core. It's going to help it keep its mass as it starts hitting things. But because this is lead, it's relatively soft. It's much more susceptible to damage when it hits things. So it's possible that when I receive a bullet or even a bullet fragment and I go to take a measurement of that bullet, it may be less than the true measurement because it's hit things and I now only have a partial bullet. Or conversely, it could actually be a wider diameter because it hits something and it flattens, so that causes it to expand. So that's why when I'm taking that measurement into consideration, I may not be able to narrow it down to just one specific caliber.
And State's Exhibit 100, what's this?
These are two images of the fired cartridge case that was submitted for the examination. So the left image is from the side, and the right image, you're looking at what's called the head stamp of the cartridge. So the head stamp itself is the outer ring where you're going to see information such as the caliber. So 45 Colt is the caliber. You may also see symbols which relate to the manufacturer. And then this silver colored surface in the center here is the primer that I've been talking about. So this is what the firing pin comes into contact with when you pull the trigger. So this crater in the center, that's the firing pin impression. So when the firing pin falls, strikes the primer, it leaves behind an impression of the firing pin. And also during the firing process, the cartridge case rests up against a flat surface called the breech face. And during the firing process, this cartridge case slams into the breech face, and it can pick up an impression of imperfections on that surface. So you may see some parallel lines. Some of these lines are kind of arcing. They almost appear to be crosshatch. Again, there's more parallel lines on the left here. That's an impression that this cartridge case has picked up from the breech face of the firearm.
Did you compare this casing with anything else, any other casings?
This was the only fired cartridge case that was submitted, but I did compare it to those known specimens that I collected from the revolver that was submitted.
And the known specimens, are those the ones that you fired out of the revolver yourself?
That's correct. That's the secondary evidence that I spoke about earlier. So I created that evidence in the lab by physically test firing the gun, and they became my knowns at that point.
Did you form an opinion about whether or not this cartridge casing was fired from the gun that we saw in the earlier exhibits?
Yes, it's my opinion that I identified this cartridge case as having been fired by the revolver.
State's Exhibit 101. What are we looking at here?
So these are representative images of the comparison that I did to get to that conclusion of identification. So if you look at the image on the left, this is two cartridge cases being compared side by side. And this is on my what's called comparison microscope. So at the laboratory, I have this microscope. I can mount two specimens. There are two separate microscopes connected by an optical bridge, and there's a binocular eyepiece at the top. So when I look through that binocular eyepiece, I can see images of both specimens side by side. So in the left image, there's this black line running down the center. That's what separates the two cartridge cases. So on the left side, you can see my notes at the bottom here, F item 2, that's my annotation for that came from item 2, which is the revolver. So those are my knowns. On the right side is item 3. So that's the cartridge case that was submitted. And in the photo on the left, I'm comparing those breech face marks that I spoke about earlier. So the impression of that flat surface, I'm looking at the parallel lines as well as the crosshatch lines. And the image on the right, I'm looking at the features down within the firing pin impression.
Thank you. State's Exhibit 102. What's this?
This expert's doing a great job.
These are 4 cartridges that were submitted for.
Let me just say, I've seen folks in the chat saying Ian Runkle is going to have a fit over this testimony. I'm sure there's going to be something here, but keep in mind, yeah, there is a decent chance of people on the jury that are familiar with firearms and whatnot. Maybe they'll see through his testimony here, but both sides are likely to not want firearms experts on the jury or people who have a lot of experience with firearms. So, keep in mind that somebody who is not very, very, very familiar with guns is going to hear this testimony and think like, hey, like this is pretty solid. And the way that he's explaining things seems to make sense. It's pretty clear to me. I'm coming at this as somebody who definitely is not a firearms expert. I said before, I have fired firearms on a gun range before. I have some experience, not like a lot. But this guy is, when it comes to an expert witness, you can have somebody that has substantial expertise and experience and whatnot, but they're a terrible expert because they don't know how to explain stuff to newbies. This guy's actually really good at this. Like he's, and part of it is the questioning too. I will, give that to Carrie Morrissey, that she's good at also like working a little bit harder to get the exact answer that she wants, a la, did Alec Baldwin pull the trigger, right? Or could the trigger have been pulled or not have been pulled for this to go off. So this is going pretty well for the state so far. It's Monday morning, first thing, fresh brains by the jury. So I envision the jurors all paying attention pretty closely to this so far.
For examination.
And when they were submitted to you for examination, were you given information about where they came from?
Yes, I do have that information that's been populated into the database.
And if you would tell us, just so that we know what your understanding was, just going to state of mind.
Right. It appears 3 of these were taken from the top of a cart, and the 4th was located in a holster inside of building. Those are the descriptions that I have.
Did you conduct any testing on these cartridges?
Yes, I did.
Tell us about that.
So the process that I spoke about earlier, first I just examined the physical characteristics of these cartridges. I then x-rayed them to see if I could learn anything more about the inside. And then the last step was to actually disassemble these cartridges.
And after going through all of that, did you form an opinion about whether these cartridges were dummies or live?
So these cartridges contain the 4 components that are required to be live functional ammunition. So that being the cartridge case, the bullet.
What is going on? Why did that pause?
In the bottom here,
Oh, what happened? For some reason, hang on. Sorry, guys. My audio just switched from my earbuds. Oh, you know what happened? Okay, hang on. 1 second. Sorry. This is the problem with AirPods is sometimes they switch devices. Okay. This should work.
here is the primer, which you see in the center of the photograph on the right. And inside the cartridge case is going to be powder, which is the propellant. So these 4 cartridges had all 4 of those main components, which are consistent with being live ammunition.
Is there writing on the head stamp of that bullet? Or the cartridge, rather?
Yes, it's the head stamp of the cartridge. Again, so this is the bottom of the cartridge. It has the caliber and these kind of flower type logos with a line indicate the manufacturer of the cartridge case.
And did all of these cartridges have that same indication on the head stamp?
Yes.
Did all of the cartridges have the same color primer?
Yes.
Did all of the cartridges have the same shape projectile?
Yes. So you can see in the image on the left, the shape of the bullet here, as well as the color, the finish of the bullet. So these are what are called lead flat nose bullets.
State's Exhibit 103. What are we looking at here?
This is a photograph of essentially a box of ammunition that was submitted to the lab. So on the right-hand side, you see information that's present on the exterior of the box. And on the left-hand side is the foam tray that's inside that box, as well as the cartridges that were inside it.
When this photo was taken, if you can tell us, had the order of the cartridges in the styrofoam insert been modified?
Yes, so generally a box of ammunition comes in with 1 item number. And when I opened it up, I saw various things, various calibers, various types of bullets. So I started to form groups based on what was in that box. And then I gave them their own sub-item number. So for instance, I believe this was item 13, and I divided them based on the physical characteristics that I was seeing.
So the cartridges are in different positions in the styrofoam insert in this photo than they may have been at the time they were taken into evidence.
That is possible. I'm not sure what positions they were in at the time it was open.
And did you do any testing on these cartridges that were in this box?
Yes, I did the same series of testing that I've explained before.
And can you summarize for us what was in this box based on your examination and testing?
May I check my notes? Just double
Certainly.
check.
What's in the box, man? Once again, they're reminding the jury about how there were different rounds that were mixed
So
together.
the vast majority of the cartridges that were in this box were dummy cartridges. And some of them had visual indicators. As I mentioned before, they may have a hole drilled in the side, or you could shake them. And again, that's an audible indicator. However, there was one cartridge in this box that, again, it had the 4 components required to be live ammunition.
And when you're looking at this photo, can you identify the cartridge that you believe was determined to be live?
I believe it was this one here with the silver primer.
Thank you. State's Exhibit 104. What's this?
This is actually 2 additional images of that cartridge that I just pointed out on the screen. So this is a side view of the cartridge on the left and an image of the head stamp region on the right.
I want to talk to you about the characteristics of this cartridge compared to the 4 live cartridges that we saw earlier. Does this cartridge have the same shape, projectile, or bullet as the other 4?
Yes, it does.
Does it have the same indication on the head stamp?
Yes,
And does it have the same color primer?
it does.
State's Exhibit 105. Can you tell us what we're looking at here?
These are images of additional ammunition that was submitted for examination. And these, some of the ammunition came in being declared as live ammunition. So these are images of some of those cartridges that were submitted.
So these are all live.
They were described as being live, and they had the physical characteristics of being live.
Based on the information that you received that went along with these cartridges, where did these cartridges come from?
May I refer?
Go ahead.
These cartridges are described as having been, or excuse me, as having come from Seth Kenny.
And do these cartridges, are they different than the live rounds, the 5 live rounds that we've seen photos of previously?
There are some differences, yes.
What are those?
So I see differences in the morphology of the bullet, so the shape of the bullet. For instance, this first one in the top left, this is actually a nickel-plated hollow point bullet, so it's not the lead flat nose that you previously saw. The images below that, these bullet types are semi-wad cutters. So again, it's just a different design of bullet. So it's different in shape than the ones you previously saw. You also see additional head stamps here, such as Winchester, GFL, which is a trade name called Fiocchi, and as well as CBC, which is made by Magtech. And this, due to the glare, it's a little difficult to see in this photo, but I also believe there's differences in the colors of the primers.
And let me ask you, if you were to go to a gun store and buy a box of ammunition, would the ammunition in that box have different shaped projectiles?
No, if I was buying a brand new box of ammunition, you go to Walmart, it's going to say on the outside what those bullet designs are. For example, it may say jacketed hollow point. It may say round nose. It may say truncated cone. So I would expect if I open that brand new box of ammunition, all of the bullet morphologies would be the same.
Thank you. State's Exhibit 106. What's this?
this is another series of photographs of another ammunition box that was scented. So in the top left, you see the exterior of the box. Bottom left, you see that foam insert as well as the cartridges. And then the image of the right on the right is just those cartridges being removed from the tray.
Can you tell us where these came from, at least what the description was that was provided to you?
Do you have an item number for this by chance?
I will get you one. $28.
Okay. Item 28 was described as having come from the item 27 tray, which is the tray you see here, which was described as having come from the 26 box. And the 26 box was described as coming from 126 Monroe Street.
In your examination of these cartridges, were you able to make a determination about whether they were live or dummies?
May I refer to this?
Sure.
Okay, so these cartridges were submitted being declared as being live cartridges. So basically they were submitted and it was understood that these were live functioning ammunition. So I did disassemble 2 of these just to essentially verify that. And the 2 that I disassembled, again, it had the 4 main components that are required to be live functioning ammunition. So the ones that I didn't, they were described as being live, but the 2 that I did had all 4 components required.
Are there any differences in the characteristics of these live cartridges compared to the live cartridges that came from the set of the movie Rust?
Yeah, so again, in the bottom left, I see differences in primer color. These are brass as opposed to nickel. I can't read the head stamps in this photograph, but as far as the bullets go, these are also different because we have the ones that have this sort of little lip above the mouth.
Sorry.
Those are called semi-wad cutters. And the other ones, which you see do not have that lip, these are called truncated cone. So the ones that you previously saw, these are different from flat nose because they don't have the rounded sides. It just goes straight. If you were to picture like an orange construction cone, it just goes straight up to the tip.
State's Exhibit 107. What's this? Well, and let's begin with what your understanding was of where they came from.
Again, these were reported as coming from 126 Monroe Street.
Were they provided to you with the understanding that they were presumed live or dummy? What was?
Yes, these were presumed live.
And do you have an opinion about whether or not they are actually live cartridges?
So in this case, I did not disassemble any of these, so I can't speak about what's inside the cartridge. So for instance, does it actually have an active primer? Does it have the propellant? So since I didn't disassemble these, I can't testify that I know what's on the inside. But again, these were described as being live.
And the characteristics of these cartridges, did you find them to be consistent with live ammunition?
Based on my physical observations of the exterior, yes.
And are there differences in the characteristics between these cartridges and the 5 cartridges that were provided to you from the set of the movie Rust?
Yes, it's the same types of differences that we've been discussing. So I see differences in the head stamp, which indicates a different manufacturer, as well as the bullet morphology appears different.
State's Exhibit 108. What's this?
These are additional cartridges submitted. And again, these were submitted being declared as live cartridges.
And did they appear to be consistent with live cartridges?
Two of these I did disassemble, so I could verify that they had the 4 components of live cartridges. The rest I did not. So they were physically consistent with being live, but again, I don't have an understanding of what's occurring inside the cartridge.
And same question. Do these cartridges have different characteristics than the live rounds provided from the set of the movie Rust?
Yes, they do. It's again, it's the same. Various head stamps, various primer colors, various bullet morphologies.
State's Exhibit 109. Have you seen this before?
Yes.
Is State's Exhibit 109 from your notes?
Yes, it is.
Just tell us what we're looking at.
So, as part of my examination of the ammunition, I worked with the contributor to figure out which items they wanted disassembled. So I made this chart in my notes. So this shows the images of the cartridges prior to disassembly. The middle column explains the original item number, as well as what the item number that I was going to create in order to disassemble a cartridge. And then the last column is just a description of essentially what's left. So for instance, the third row across, item 28 originally was all of those cartridges, but I removed 2. So I sub-itemized 28-1 and 28-2. And then the third column tells you that what's left of 28 is 7 remaining cartridges, and the 2 that I subdivided are eventually what we're going to be disassembled.
And if you already testified to it, I apologize. Did you disassemble all of the live rounds from the set of the movie Rust?
All of the rounds that had the physical characteristics of being live, yes, I disassembled those because I wanted to know if they did or did not have the components on the inside.
Did you take a photograph of the gunpowder that came out of those disassembled rounds from the set of the movie?
Yes, I did.
And did you also take a photograph of the gunpowder that came out of the live cartridges that came from other sources? I think you mentioned Mr. Kenny and also 126 Monroe Street. Did you photograph that powder?
Yes, I did.
And without even using a microscope, did you see differences?
Yes, there were clear differences in both the shapes of the powders as well as the color, which means they may have some different types of coatings on the powder.
Let's move to State's Exhibit 110. Tell us what we're looking at here.
So on the left side, you're looking at a photograph of the powder that was taken from the item 4 cartridge. So this was one that was submitted that was presumed to be live based on its exterior appearance. But once I took it apart, this is the actual powder that I pulled from the inside of that cartridge. And on the right, you're looking at the same thing, but this is from item 24-1, which is one of the cartridges that was submitted as being known to be a live cartridge.
And the powder, I understand on the left, we're looking at powder from item 4. Were you able to see the powder from item 5, 6, 7, and 13-1?
Yes, they were all consistent, which is why I only included one photograph, because it would be 5 photographs of the same thing.
Thank you.
So the whole point here, the reason why they're going point by point and through all of these characteristics to show the difference between Seth Kenny's live rounds that were in his storage versus the live rounds that were found on set, looking deep at the gunpowder, how it looked different and how it had all these different characteristics, and then looking at all of the other characteristics of these different rounds. The whole point is because the state here is trying to show the jury the live rounds found on set are different from the live rounds that Seth Kenney had. Therefore, the live rounds on set could not have come from Seth Kenney. That's what they want the jury to conclude. However, the fact that they are different from the live rounds on set, to me, doesn't mean that they couldn't have all been Seth Kenney's. Like, Seth Kenney could just have live rounds of different characteristics on him, and that the ones that are different from the ones that he has back in his storage, could just be that he had that entire grouping that he took to the Rust set. I'm just talking hypothetically. I'm not saying that I believe this necessarily, but just kind of working through this argument. You can't necessarily automatically conclude that therefore the ones on set were definitely not Seth Kenney's. They need a little bit more for the jury to get there, in my opinion, or at least for me to get there anyway. Let me get some more questions here, questions and super chats and whatnot. Thank you guys. Scottish Jason, question. They could only show a picture of the firearm because FBI destroyed it in trying to get results to match the theory. Is that true? No. They've been showing pictures of all different rounds and all kinds of things. So that, not because it's matching any kind of a theory. I mean, of course, the state is introducing all of this because it's helpful to their case. Sarah ER, what is the name of the officer who was in charge that made quite a few mistakes? I want to show my CJ class. Thank you. I think it was Lieutenant Tim Benavides. I think that's who you're looking for. Dionysia Jaclo, is it common for the FBI, et cetera, to destroy evidence just for testing? Let's say this is a mistrial. What happens then? Well, that same testing is going to apply to the next trial if it gets recharged or retried, I should say. If this were to end in a mistrial, that evaluation still remains that evaluation. Obviously, the defense can't then try to get the firearm tested again by some other forensic lab somewhere. But from what he said, this expert said that he had excuse me, he had permission to perform this kind of test, knowing that this could possibly result. He didn't say who gave him permission, whether it was the FBI or the state or maybe all of the parties. I don't know. I doubt that the defense would have consented to that. Mary M, thank you, Lita, for this calm stream. No problem. Question: does Alec Baldwin have a civil case running currently concerning Rust? There was. It's settled. I don't believe there are any more civil cases on this matter except for actually maybe even the one between Hannah Gutierrez-Reed and Seth Kenney that may also have also settled. I can't remember, but I think they have all at this point gone away. Derek Boodle, could this technically be a show trial to get information in for the Alec Baldwin case later? I mean, I don't know what you mean exactly by show trial. Excuse me. I don't know exactly what you mean by show trial, but I will say that Alec Baldwin's team is 100% watching this trial. Absolutely, they are. And he himself might also be watching this trial because they're getting a lot of information as to what the state has, where they're likely to go with evidence, with witnesses, and all kinds of stuff. So they definitely are getting information from this. Mads Bazoo, is Menendez Monday on hold until this trial is over? And with respect to this trial, what charges is Hannah facing and what's the sentence she's looking at if she's found guilty? Yes, Menendez Monday is just on hold until the trial ends. And then we'll get back to a regular schedule. So she's got two charges. Well, she's got two alternative charges for involuntary manslaughter, meaning they're going to try to convict her on one or the other. And then there's also an evidence tampering charge related to her handing off an alleged bag of cocaine to a friend or acquaintance around the time of this whole investigation. So that's that. The involuntary manslaughter charge is actually a very short period of time. I think it's like 18 months is like the max, is what she would get in prison. So it's really not a long time. Same thing with Alec Baldwin. Debbie Faison Cook gifted 1 Legalbytes membership. Thank you so much, Debbie. So kind of you. And I wrote this down. So should got the membership there. So welcome back to Bike Club. Happy to have you here. Thirsh Kaziano, did anyone fingerprint the live rounds? That is going to come up. If it doesn't come up in direct, it definitely will be coming up in cross-examination. Same thing with DNA testing, like DNA swabs of these, because that came up with one of the earlier witnesses on cross-examination. The defense was like, well, why wasn't there DNA testing done on this? And the witness said something like, well, I was told that we couldn't do it or something like that. And I think that came from the FBI. So that's probably going to come up in this cross-examination as well. Phoenix Fire, member for 5 months. Thank you so much for being a member and for coming and hanging out with us and watching this trial with us. All right. I think, let's see if there are any more questions before we continue on. Oh, there are some questions. Okay, hang on 1 second. Sorry, guys. I apologize if I miss any along the way. Okay. Going on through. Okay. Nobody. What is the defense's argument? Their argument is basically that there was so much going on set that she couldn't possibly have properly done her job well. That this is the responsibility of so many other people, and that she's being treated as the fall guy, essentially. That's really what they're arguing. Jeannie Armenta, didn't she have plenty of time to clear out damning evidence towards himself, or didn't SK? Oh, Seth Kenny. Oh yeah, they did not invest, or they did not check his stuff until like a month after the incident. So yeah, expect that to come up on cross as well. All right, moving on down again. That may have been it. Mary M, a follow-up question on the settlement. Settlement is basically on the civil side when both sides decide to end the litigation ahead of trial. Oftentimes there's an exchange of money, not always, but basically they both agree. They do their own analysis to figure out how much is this really worth it to me. Sometimes legal expenses are a big part of that analysis. Okay. Tish, the beginning of the trial tends to be very technical. Do you think this trial will get less technical, or will we keep on discussing the guns in details like this? I don't know, actually. I think there's going to be a lot of technicality. There's going to be a lot of that in this case. But yeah, they're usually they start with a bit more of an emotional kind of start for a lot of these cases, but they decided to kind of jump right into the technical side of all of this. Nico Kiski, does compound question mean 2 questions at once? Why is that not okay? Two or more questions at once. It's not okay, or it's disfavored because it can be confusing which question the witness is answering when they give an answer to basically 2 questions at the same time. So it makes the testimony a bit unclear. Okay, that's all for now. Let's get back to the testimony.
And I'm going to use briefly a demonstrative aid.
We're going to take our morning bathroom break.
Sure.
Please don't talk among yourselves or anyone else about the evidence received here in court.
All rise for the jury.
All right, you may be seated. Counsel approach.
Mr. Ziegler, I just have a couple of final questions for you. Can you see these demonstrative aids that I've put side by side on the screen?
Yes.
And can you see the writing at the bottom, the typing?
Yes, I can.
Okay. So the image on the left, is that an exhibit that we've already looked at?
Yes, we've previously seen this photograph.
And same thing with the image on the right. Is that an exhibit we've already looked at?
Yes.
And I'm sorry, there's that writing that was out of the frame. So I'm going to scroll up here. Is this an exhibit that we've already looked at?
Yes.
Item 13-1, did that come from the set of the movie Rust? I'm sorry. 13-1, did that come from the box that was provided to you?
Yes.
The box of ammunition that we saw earlier?
Yes, this was the box where the majority of the cartridges were in fact dummy cartridges, but this was the one that had the characteristics of being live.
And just comparing the ammunition on the left and the ammunition on the right, can you see distinguishing characteristics, understanding that you cannot see the head stamp or the primer?
Yes, so as we've previously discussed, the bullets are a different shape.
And I'm going to show you State's Exhibit 2, or I'm sorry, 102 on the left, and those are items 4 through 7. Where did items 4 through 7 come from in terms of the description you received?
Those were the ones that I previously mentioned were from the top of a cart, and with item 7 being found in a holster inside a building.
Do these cartridges that we're looking at on the left and the right, do they appear to have the same shape projectile?
Yes, they do.
All right, thank you. I'll pass the witness.
Okay, cross-examination. Let's see where this is where the rubber hits the road, is on cross-examination.
Yeah. Sir, good morning.
Good morning.
Now, Mr. Ziegler, I want to start with your training with the FBI. As part of that training, were you trained in recognizing dummy rounds?
There were many portions of the training manual dedicated to ammunition, ammunition components. I can't recall if there is a specific task related to dummy ammunition.
And by answering that way, it sounds to me like you were not trained on the recognition and characteristics of various types of dummy rounds, correct?
I don't necessarily agree with that.
Well, do you remember any modules that you were trained on dummy rounds or not?
Not specific, no.
Okay. So you wouldn't know what a Denix round is, would you?
I do not.
Okay. And you wouldn't know a Denix round is from Spain and it doesn't shake and it's a dummy round. You're not aware of that?
I'm not familiar with that.
Okay. Now, also with respect to your training, you were trained in gun safety, correct?
Yes, sir.
And as an FBI agent, you're trained in gun safety, including don't point a weapon at anybody.
I'm not an agent, but because I fire as part of my job, I have been trained in safety precautions, yes.
Okay, sir. And as part of your test firing protocols, I'm sure you observe all those safety. Not to point a gun at anybody, treat it as loaded, keep your finger off the trigger until you're ready to fire. You observe all those.
Yes, sir.
Okay. And sir, you indicated one of your opinions was that your first testing, you determined this gun functioned normally.
That's correct.
Okay. When you were doing that functionality test on the revolver you received, what types of things did you look at on the firearm?
So first I would inspect things like, are there bulges in the barrel, cracks in the frame, things that I may think may lead to a catastrophic failure during the testing.
Okay, sir, do you take that revolver apart in the initial stage?
I do not.
So later on, and I'll come back to this, but you indicated when you hit that hammer with your mallet that it fractured some internal components, correct?
Correct.
And there was the sear. We saw a little piece of the trigger. You remember, sir?
Yes.
Now, because you did not open the revolver uh, prior to doing that hammer test, can you be certain any of those pieces weren't broken before?
I would say I can't be 100% certain. However, because it did function normally, I would expect those pieces were intact at the time I received it and did that initial examination.
Okay, and when you
That's an interesting point, because what he's getting at, what the defense attorney is getting at here, is that, well, maybe when you hit it with the mallet, when it was at the quarter cock or the half cock position, maybe each time you did that, it actually weakened it, and it made some sort of cracks where it still could function, but you did something that ended up still damaging it, but not damaging it to the extent that you ended up seeing after the full cocked position, when you took it apart to look at it, because he didn't take it apart each and every time, only at the very end. That's an interesting point in the testing.
when you visually examined it from the outside, you then test fired that weapon 12 times. Is that right?
As it was 12 times throughout the process, but yes.
And you observed when you did that it had to be fully cocked and that trigger had to be depressed to fire it, correct?
Aside from the hammer being at rest and being struck on a loaded chamber.
Correct. And other than those tests you did, I'm talking about the first part, it fired normally.
Correct.
Okay. Now, after you did that normal gun functionality testing, to determine its functioning, you then do what's called accidental discharge testing. Is that right?
That was after the microscopic comparisons were done. So that was the last test that I did.
Okay, so you do the functionality, then you do the microscopic examination we saw, and then you do the accidental discharge.
Correct.
Okay. Now, the accidental discharge, you mentioned that you consulted the FBI SOP.
That's correct.
Now, an SOP is a standard operating procedure.
Yes, sir.
Now, under that standard operating procedure, were you to do a type of test called a drop test?
So the drop test is, I would say that's a subcategory of accidental discharge where I physically drop the firearm to see if it will fire. And that is typically only done if that is as the situation has been reported by the contributor. So that was not relevant in this case.
Okay, when you say and a drop test, you can tell the jury more. That's when you, from a distance of about 4 feet, drop the weapon, and if it lands and it fires, that's what you're trying to determine, correct?
It depends on how the situation is being reported. So within that same SOP, it provides the examiner some discretion as in regards to how that is believed to occur. So for instance, say I'm cleaning my gun and I accidentally knock it off the table and I'm saying that caused it to fire. I would try to replicate that situation.
Whoa.
If I had a gun leaning against a door and I'm saying that the door opened and the firearm fell, I would try to replicate that situation. So yes, the traditional drop test is just it being held as you would to shoot it and dropping it, but there is some discretion that's allowed if it is being reported in a certain way.
Okay, and you're familiar with SAMI standards, are you not?
Yes,
And SAMI is the Sporting Arms and Ammunition Manufacturing Institute, is that correct?
that is correct.
They were commissioned by the federal government about 100 years ago to come up with industry type standards.
I don't know when they were instituted, but yes, they come up with standards for ammunition as far as dimensions and things like that.
1926. Were you aware of that?
Not off the top of my head.
Okay. So in their SAMI standards, there is a standardized drop test. You're aware of that?
I'm not.
Okay, but that's the industry standard for firearms across the country. This type of testing, right? Multiple states use this.
I wouldn't say that's the industry standard, and also their industry is different from the forensic industry.
Okay, and you also know there's no type of shock test. Do you know what a shock test is?
In regards to what?
Well, it's kind of what you did with the mallet. Um, are you familiar with the National Institute of Justice? They call it a shock test.
I'm not familiar with that test.
Okay. So when you made your determination to hit that revolver with a mallet, is that part of the SOP that you hit it with a mallet?
That is written in the SOP, yes.
How many times have you done that as a forensic examiner? How many weapons you've done that on?
I would say probably less than 10, and this is the first one that I've had in actual casework.
Okay, so in actual casework, what do you mean by that?
As opposed to training.
Oh, in training. So the other 9 were done in training when you hit it with the mallet.
I don't know the exact number, but yes.
So this is literally the first time in your career as a forensic examiner that you've ever, in cases, hit a revolver with a hammer.
That is correct.
So is it fair to say you've never had this situation where you've hit a revolver and it's broken before?
Not in a case.
Okay. Did that happen in training?
I don't know about it specifically being a revolver, but yes, I have done it in training where the firearms do break.
And you earlier told us that you base your discretion on that accidental discharge test on input given to you about what might have happened.
Not the accidental discharge test. That would be the drop test.
Drop test. So you didn't have any information this was hit with some kind of hammer on the rest set, correct?
That's correct. I did not.
Okay, but you chose to do this, and then you hit the weapon with the hammer resting in the resting position, right?
Yes.
And then you did in the full cock position, correct?
It was not in that order, but you are correct.
Okay, and I'm not trying to mix it up, but when you hit it with the full cock position, that's when you broke the internal components.
Yes.
Now, do you know how hard you hit that?
I do not.
So on a drop test, would you agree with me? You're trying to eliminate variables. So in other words, gravity is the same, right?
Sure.
Gravity's not going to change. So if you drop that gun from 4 feet every time, and you know the weight of that gun, you're eliminating variables, correct?
I suppose so.
Okay. Well, have you been taught that at all in the FBI?
No. The purpose of these tests is not to figure out exactly what height or exactly what amount of force or exactly how many numbers of times you have to strike this firearm to get it to fire. It's just to try to generally replicate the situations and see if the firearm will fire without pulling the trigger.
Well, sir, so did you ever measure the trigger pull force on that revolver?
I did.
You did?
Yes.
What was the trigger pull force?
May I refer to my notes?
Yes, sir.
Between 2 and 2.5 pounds.
2.5 pounds. Okay. Did you measure the weight of that firearm?
The weight of
the revolver?
No.
Okay. So, and you have no idea
that is kind of weird that they didn't weigh the revolver if they weighed the force, the trigger pull force. Interesting though, because 2 to 2.5 pounds of force. I mean, that's not like just like kind of lightly tapping the trigger. You kind of have to pull that pretty. I mean, that's at least how it sounds to me. Like I said, I'm not a firearms expert. Maybe Ian Runkle would have a different perspective on that, but it seems to me that that's like 2 to 2.5 pounds of force. Like that's you would have to actually kind of use some muscle in your finger in order to do that. It seems to me. Folks can correct me in the chat if that's wrong. All right, some folks are saying it's light. Okay. All right, fair enough.
the foot-pounds of pressure that you were applying to that hammer when you hit it with the mallet, correct?
Right. There's no way to quantify that.
And there's no way to quantify when you do that 6 times if you're hitting it.
Yeah, I stand corrected. A lot of folks in the chat saying that that's actually very, very light. Okay, so like I said, not a gun expert. I have never presented myself as one. I'm learning through all of these trials, and in this one, quite a bit about firearms.
The same amount every time, right?
That's correct.
As a human being, I mean, you're not going to hit it the exact same every time.
I believe that's true. Yes.
Thanks,
Okay.
Matuo.
So
That's helpful.
as we sit here, we don't know what amount of force was required to break that hammer and the internal parts, correct?
That's correct. We do not.
Okay. So if there was a question whether or not an external force of some type hit that hammer, we don't know from your testing what amount of force that was that would cause that.
You are correct.
Okay. If you were you given any other information regarding the accidental discharge testing that you can recall?
Initially, that test was not requested. It was not part of the initial exam. That the decision to do that test came in later conversations with the case agent.
Okay. So initially, they did not even ask you to do that, but it was sometime later they did.
Correct.
And did you have any understanding as to why you were going to do that?
I believe it had something to do with one of the individuals involved stating that the trigger was not pulled.
Was that Alec Baldwin?
I believe so.
And based on your testing on the functionality, that comment about the trigger not being pulled could not have happened.
I wouldn't say, I can't say it's impossible because I can't account for every single variable.
That's fair.
All I can testify to
That's
is the
entirely fair.
results of my testing. Okay, so when I received the firearm and I did that initial function examination, it did not appear that any of the safeties were malfunctioning or anything like that. So it was functioning normally when I received it.
And to be fair, sir, you did indicate earlier you do this in a lab. So you can't account for all the variables that might occur on a movie set, for example.
Sure.
Okay. So your testimony, and you're telling the jury that you can account for the variables you're aware of, but you cannot account for variables you might not be aware of.
Sure.
Okay. And some of those variables, and we'll come to the rounds in a little bit, but some of those variables include if you do not receive evidence or a request to test it, you're not going to test that, obviously.
That's true.
Okay. With regard to the hammer testing, you mentioned earlier that this could be destroyed permanently as part of your testing. So you got permission to do this test, correct?
Yes.
Ooh.
And that would have been for the sheriffs?
Well, my point of contact was a special agent out of Albuquerque. So I would funnel information to him. He would discuss that with the detectives, and then they would distribute the answer.
You never got permission
And
from
that
the
was
defense.
Jose Cortez?
That's correct.
Okay. And Mr. Cortez is the one that sent you the request by written submission for what he wanted you to do, correct?
As far as the communication, is that what you're referring to?
Yes, sir. I'm referring to your report. There is a submission October 28, 2021 from Jose Cortez requesting various tasks to be done.
Yes.
Okay. And then there's another one, 12/14/2021. Same thing. So he's your liaison that goes back and forth between the sheriffs and yourself, and he makes those requests.
That's correct.
Okay. Now, so you got permission to possibly destroy this revolver permanently. They gave that to you.
I received permission to conduct the test.
And you made it aware to them that this could destroy the weapon.
Yes.
Okay. When you did destroy that, you broke several internal parts.
Yes.
Okay. And then we saw that on the exhibit. You took those apart to show what had happened. Correct?
Correct.
Okay. Now, you also said that you did not see any modifications. as to that firearm, correct?
At what point?
You testified that in your functionality examination, you also determined whether it had been modified or not.
Right. So that's generally in regards to things like, has the barrel been cut? Has the stock been cut? Has this been modified to fire fully automatic? So when I talk about modifications, that's what I'm referring to. And I did not see any of those things.
Okay. And as far as internal modifications, did you look at that?
No, because I can't disassemble the firearm because I have to test it in the condition it's received.
Okay. But from your viewing it and your observation, you didn't notice anything that would tell you it was modified.
Right. Nothing jumped out immediately.
Okay. Now, you also mentioned that the full cock notch, which was the one we saw in that picture, kind of a little circle. You remember that?
Yes.
Okay, sir, you said that it looked a little flatter potentially.
Compared to the quarter and half cock, yes, it didn't have as much of a claw shape to it.
But you could not, you did not conclude that had been modified. You're not certain it had been modified.
Right. I'm not certain. It's a very small surface that we're talking about. So it's possible, it may have been modified. It may have been damaged during the exam, or it could also be one of the firearms that just doesn't have a very pronounced sear notch there.
Okay. So you just don't know for sure.
Correct. I don't know.
Okay. Now, I want to turn to the rounds. One of the things I heard you say several times is there's 4 components to determine a live round. Is that right, sir?
Yes, a live cartridge has 4 main components.
And you said the case, the projectile or bullet, the primer, and then the powder.
Correct.
So you also testified earlier that when you were given presumed live rounds, but you did not disassemble them, you could not confirm they were live because you didn't get inside to see the powder.
Right. So there were certain cartridges that, again, I discussed this plan with the case agent, the contributor, to try to figure out which ones we needed to take apart. So there was a subset that we concluded needed to be disassembled. So, for example, the ones that were presumed to be live, we needed to see what was on the inside of those cartridges. However, they sent quite a few presumed live cartridges. So it didn't make sense to take apart every single piece of ammunition that they sent in. So we came up with a sampling plan to where we just determined we were going to take apart some of them as a representative sample.
Sure. And I guess my question too was, you can't tell something is a live round until you make that final step to determine if there's powder inside.
Yes, that is true.
Okay. So you could not, for example, in your FBI training, you could not look at a picture and determine that's definitively a live round.
I wouldn't do that based on a photograph, no.
Okay. And that's part of your FBI training, that you would have to go through the 4 components, take it apart, make sure there's powder, and that's what gives you the confirmation, correct?
I would say yes. In order to know for sure, you would have to be able to see the powder. Yeah.
That's how you've been trained.
I would say it's training related to ammunition and just understanding the components of the ammunition.
Okay. Now, as part of this also, you identified rounds that were live, and those were items, and we saw it on the last slide, items 1B 4 through 7. Is that correct?
Those aren't the 1B numbers, I don't believe. It's the lab numbers, and it was items 4 through 7 and 13-1.
You're right. I'm sorry. Yeah, it was 4 through 7 and 13-1.
Correct.
Were the labs. Okay. Now, you later in December received a request from Mr. Cortez, Agent Cortez, to conduct DNA testing. Is that right? Your lab did?
I'm not completely certain of that.
Objection foundation.
And I can ask you a question on that, Your Honor.
Okay.
Does that request for DNA testing go to you, or does it go to another person in your lab?
Well, I'm going to object to foundation again if you capacity he's talking about, he can't answer.
If there were to be a DNA test
Yes.
requested.
And I can show you, sir, the report.
I'm objecting to foundation. Why are you showing him a report
I'm
that he
gonna-
hasn't seen?
You haven't seen your own report? Have you seen your own report?
My report would not include anything related to DNA, so I'm not sure which report you're referring to.
Okay, I'm just referring to the submission to the FBI lab by Jose A. Cortez dated 12/14/2021. And did you see that?
I'd have to look at it.
Okay. If I may approach, Your Honor.
Hold on for a second. Are you having a problem with it? Okay.
All right, sir, I'm going to show you this request from 12/14/2021. If you could just look at it, don't tell us what it is, but just read it to yourself. And then you don't have to read the whole thing.
Okay.
Okay, is your memory now refreshed on that?
So that is not my report. That
Well,
is an
you gotta-
electronic communication from the field office, the case agent being Jose Cortez.
Okay, and you did not receive that personally?
Eventually I received that.
Okay, so you have seen it.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, so you know that
So we've established
certain
familiarity.
standards were submitted in this case. Are you aware of that regarding fingerprints and DNA?
I'm sure I've seen that, but that's not related to my discipline, so that doesn't affect my examination. So I don't know that that's not noteworthy to me.
Okay, so you reviewed it, but you did not participate.
You can tell by his answer that he doesn't want to give just a simple yes or no answer. He's being a little bit, I don't know if evasive is the right word for it, but he's already supplying an excuse along with the answer of like, well, that's not my area of expertise. That's not my blah, 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 which is fine. It's fine as a witness. You can do that, but it's interesting because he's familiar with it. So they can still ask a question as to like, well, are you aware of like this decision that was made regarding the DNA request? Who made that decision? If not you, who do you know who made that decision? And if you do, who was it? And why? These kinds of questions.
Participate in that.
Correct.
And right as we're sitting right now, you don't know what was submitted in terms of the people and their standards. Is that right?
I do not.
Okay. With regard to the live rounds we were seeing on those exhibits earlier, did you measure the projectile tops on each of those rounds?
No, I did not.
And so you're not able to tell us whether there are differences at all or not in the size of those projectile tops?
When you say the top, you're talking about the flat portion?
The flat portion,
And you're referencing the diameter of that flat portion?
correct?
No, I can't tell you if those are consistent. Just the shape is consistent.
Okay.
Really quick, let me get some questions here. I am our cheese ball productions. Do you think it would be different if the armor was a man? I feel like they are trying to blame drugs and being impaired on her when no one knew what they were doing on that set. I don't see anything here that suggests her being a woman is leading to her being treated unfairly. I would say there is a good chance that she's being treated unfairly, but it probably has more to do with her age and her level of power and wasta in the industry. I mean, keep in mind there were 3 people charged total for this overall incident. 2 of them were men, and 2 of them are higher powered. But yeah, I don't see her being a woman as a factor in why she was charged or why she was blamed. I mean, she is the armorer. It's kind of it makes sense for people to look very, very closely at her and what she did in relation to this whole incident, because she does have responsibility over firearm safety on set. Lupe says, I missed the beginning. Did you see something of the question to the jurors from Friday? No, they just skipped right over it. LK Ryden, raised in entertainment. I'm confused. It's not like companies. Everyone helps with safety, with drugs, guns, etc. Why no call to the police, including those who left? Everyone knows when an addict is on set. Well, first of all, thank you for the super chat. But second, Hollywood's a funny industry like that. There's a lot of funny business that goes on that people don't necessarily talk about. I'm sure she was not the only one doing drugs offset and drinking and all that kind of stuff. Now, did other people have the same level of safety responsibilities that she had? No, but that's one of those things that I would imagine there probably were many more people who were partaking in that kind of thing. So once you rat out one person, then other people start getting ratted out at the same time, and it's a very, you could call it like a very incestuous industry where you end up working with people multiple times. So people might not be so willing to dime out other people if that means that it might end up harming their career in the future. This is my impression as an outsider of the industry. So, if someone else has more intimate knowledge of the industry, feel free to chime in. Jubilee 1989, is the jury there? I thought this was not in front of the jury, but he keeps looking at it that way. The jury is there. The Lucian, isn't this a scope issue? If it's not in his report and direct didn't bring it up, isn't this out of scope? Well, no, the on cross-examination, they can bring up things that are tangentially related for context. And so this is talking about the forensic testing of the ammunition that was found on set, as well as other pieces that were, taken from other places like South Kenny's storage. But and determining, trying to get to the bottom of like where these things may have come from. DNA testing is a natural sort of thing to look at to see, did they test it? Did they swab it to see if there's, prints or DNA left behind from someone other than Hannah Gutierrez-Reed? That's a very interesting question, and it's related enough that it's properly brought up on cross-examination.
When you took the powder out of the rounds, did you weigh that powder?
I don't believe I did.
Okay, so you're not certain whether the rounds were full of powder or partially full of powder or not?
I'm not.
Okay. Let me ask you, going back to the gun, I missed one question. Before you conducted that test fire, did you look in the barrel with the bore scope?
No.
With regard to the rounds that came from Seth Kenny, you were told you have them in your report, and the Monroe Street address, you have no idea what time those were seized or what date those were seized?
I don't off the top of my head. That may be in the paperwork that was submitted, but I don't know that.
Okay. And you have no idea where Seth Kenny brought the rounds that he submitted?
I do not.
And he didn't submit them to you, correct?
No, we received evidence from the case agents.
Okay. And you didn't personally conduct any fingerprint or DNA testing because that's out of your specialty?
That's correct. I did not.
Earlier, you were talking about the different types of ammo from 126 Monroe Street. You recall that you were showing live, dummy, and blank, all three types?
Can you ask that question again?
Sure. As part of your examination of the rounds from 126 Monroe Street, you're aware that there were live rounds, blank rounds, and dummy rounds.
Objection. That misstates the facts that are already in evidence.
Let him answer the question.
Do you have specific item numbers that I can reference?
Well,
I can ask for clarification if that's helpful.
Sure, absolutely. We saw some exhibits from 126 Monroe Street, and if you want to look at your report to check out those items and determine if there were both live rounds, dummy rounds, and then if there were blanks.
Okay, may I answer your question?
Yes, sir.
So the ammunition that I have as being reported from that address includes items 28, 31, 32, 33, 34, 35, 36, and 37. And these were the cartridges that were submitted as being known live ammunition. Some of them I disassembled, but not all of them because there were too many. So all of these were either physically consistent with live ammunition based on their exterior appearance, or the ones that I actually did disassemble, I could determine it had the 4 main components.
Okay. All right, and thank you for looking for that. Now, with regard to the set, the live rounds you found on set, did you do any further testing on those with regard to the powder or anything like that, or is that out of your discipline?
That goes beyond my discipline. There was another unit that did some testing on the powder, but I can't testify to that.
Okay. Your Honor, may I have just a moment?
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. We have no further questions.
All right, thank you. Redirect.
Briefly, thank you.
Okay.
Mr. Ziggler, why not disassemble every round that was provided to you that was what I'm going to call presumed live?
Right, there were hundreds of rounds submitted in total. So for instance, you may have one item number, but that was an entire box of 50 cartridges. So in totality, just from practical purposes, as well as, you know, what is the result? What impact will this have on the result? It didn't make sense to disassemble every single cartridge that was submitted.
Did you x-ray any of the ammunition that was provided to you that was presumed live?
Yes, I x-rayed every cartridge that was submitted.
You x-rayed every single cartridge.
I did.
So you didn't disassemble every single cartridge, but you x-rayed every single cartridge.
That's true.
What did the x-ray images tell you about those presumed live cartridges?
May I refer to?
Certainly.
I just wanted to verify I did x-ray every cartridge. And what that told me is there were indicators in the dummy cartridges that I could see in the x-ray. So whether they would be the holes in the size of the cartridge case, I could see that on an x-ray, as well as some of them had metal BBs. So the metal BBs showed up in the x-ray. So the live cartridges, the gunpowder does not show up. That's not visible. But I didn't see any of those other indicators to suggest that they may be something else that, you know, other than what they were reported as being.
And just to be clear, the dummy cartridges that you examined and disassembled, there were no dummy cartridges that came from 126 Monroe Street.
That's correct. Every cartridge that I have as being listed from that address was either consistent with being live, or I actually disassembled it and it had the components of being live.
And when you say consistent with being live, not only are you talking about the physical characteristics, but also the x-rays.
That's true. There was no indication from the x-ray that they were anything else.
You testified on cross-examination that of those live rounds that were provided to you, you took a representative sample, and those were the ones that you disassembled.
Correct.
Can you tell us how you decided which rounds to include in your representative sample for disassembly?
Right. So as I mentioned before, working with the contributor, there were certain ones that they needed to have disassembled, but then when it came to these exemplars, we agreed to do a random sampling. And the way that I chose that, it was random as far as the item numbers go, but I also looked for cartridges that had similar head stamps. So I was trying to see if similar exemplars might have similar features on the inside.
In any of the presumed live rounds that you disassembled after putting them into your representative sample, did any of them turn out to be dummies?
Yes, there was actually one that from the exterior appearance and the x-ray, I didn't see any indication that it was a dummy round. And then after disassembling that, I found there was no powder, and you can see down into the primer pocket, it was hollow. So it was an inactive primer. So there was one cartridge that was submitted that on the outside appeared live, but upon further inspection did not have the 4 components required to fire a cartridge.
Can you tell us what item number that was?
It was item 22.
And can you tell us what your understanding was in terms of the description, where item 22 came from? And specifically, I'd like to know, did it come from 126 Monroe or Mr. Kenny?
Item 22 is a cartridge from the item 20 box, which is a box with tape from the prop truck.
Thank you, sir. Do you have to measure those projectiles or bullets to be able to see that they are different than the projectiles in the live rounds from the movie set?
No, they have distinct shapes in morphology, and some of them have distinct coatings, such as one of the projectile was a nickel-coated hollow point bullet.
You can just see that with your naked eye.
You can, and the photographs with glare and the print quality may not show it as well, but if you had the bullets, the cartridge in your hand, you would be able to see distinct shapes.
All of the items that you had, that you tested, that you examined, when your testing is complete, what do you do with them?
They get packaged in their appropriate outer packaging, and then they get returned to the field through, we have a unit at the laboratory that helps us out with this called the evidence management unit. So they basically inventory everything, make sure everything that's supposed to be there is still there, and they're the ones that ultimately return it to the field.
And when you say they return it to the field, does it go right back to the Santa Fe County Sheriff's Office?
Typically, if it's associated with an FBI case, it's going to go to the FBI field office.
Do you know what happened in this case?
I do not.
Okay, thank you. Nothing further.
All right.
All right, you're excused. Thank you.
Witness is excused. Who's next?
The state calls Shannon first.
LK Ryden, thanks for the super chat. Raising entertainment. Oh, wait, hang on a second. Wait, where's the other one? Here's the other one. Your follow up. I was unclear. I was raised in the industry. Normally, if anyone in an important role is unsafe, especially if they are young, others step in. No one did before
To
Halyna
remind,
died. It's negligence by the entire set.
Any witnesses in this case that haven't been called, except expert witnesses, to stay off the live stream?
Can't disagree with that, honestly.
Face the judge and raise your right hand.
Do you swear or affirm under penalty of law that the testimony you'll give in this case will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes.
All right, have a seat talking to the microphone.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Would you please state your name for the record?
My name is Shannon Prince. My last name is spelled Prince.
And where are you currently employed?
I'm currently employed at the FBI laboratory in Quantico, Virginia.
And what's your title at the FBI?
I am a physical scientist, forensic examiner.
How long have you been employed in the latent print discipline?
Over 19 years.
And are you a member of any professional organizations related to your employment?
Yes, I am. I'm a member of the International Association for Identification.
And do you instruct any courses in the latent print discipline?
Yes, I do. I instruct courses on latent print processing, which is using chemicals to develop latent prints, as well as postmortem processing, which is using fingerprints to identify the unknown deceased.
And do you take proficiency tests as part of your ongoing work at the FBI?
Yes,
How often and how many?
I take one proficiency test each year in comparing prints, and I've taken one test every 5 years in processing latent prints.
It is kind of funny that her last name is Prince and she does forensic examination of DNA prints.
Have you ever failed a proficiency test?
No, I have not.
All right. And are you a certified latent print examiner?
Yes, I am. I'm a board certified latent print examiner with the International Association for Identification.
Great. Your Honor, at this time, I move the court to recognize Ms. Prince as an expert witness in the area of latent fingerprint examination.
No objection.
All right, you're recognized as an expert in latent fingerprint examination.
Thank you. All right. Why don't you give us an idea about what your duties are as a latent print examiner?
I receive a variety of evidence from either FBI field offices or state, local, and tribal officers. I receive this evidence in the laboratory, and then I examine that evidence with a variety of chemicals, powders, or light sources. When I develop latent prints, I then compare those latent prints to known prints of individuals and come to conclusions. I may search those latent prints in a fingerprint database, such as a computer, to make identifications. And then I provide a report based on my results. I can also testify in the court of law on those results.
You mentioned you work with a known fingerprint. Can you explain to us what a known fingerprint is?
On the palm side of your hand, you have these raised portions of skin called friction ridges. They form patterns on your hand. You also have them on the soles of your feet. In order to record a known print, the finger is usually rolled in black printer's ink and then rolled on a contrasting white background, such as a fingerprint card. And that creates a known print. These days, it's often recorded by placing your finger on a flatbed scanner, and it creates a digital copy of your fingerprint.
And you also mentioned latent fingerprints. What is a latent fingerprint?
A latent print is the unintentional or chance reproduction of your friction ridge skin when you touch an object. When you touch an object, you may leave a latent print. It's often left in the oils and sweat on your hand, but it can be left in other substances such as blood, dirt, grease, ketchup. It's often not readily visible and requires a forensic light source such as a laser, a chemical, or a powder to be made visible.
And how are fingerprints compared and identifications affected?
It's a 3-step process, which is called analysis, comparison, evaluation, or ACE, ACE, where I analyze latent prints, looking if they're suitable. Then I can compare those latent prints and known prints side by side, and then making an evaluation decision, where I can make one of 3 decisions. An identification decision, the latent print and known print were made by the same person. An exclusion decision, where the latent print and known print were not made by the same person. Or an inconclusive decision, where I don't have enough information to make a conclusive decision. Often this is times when a fingerprint card, like a known card, is smeared or smudged, or it has too much ink. I can't make a conclusive comparison because that print is too poor to make a conclusive decision.
Right. And when
She's good. She's really good at describing or explaining these things and these concepts, which, you know, right from the outset, she's great. Really quick here. NPC I'm not wants to know if they go for Hannah's character, does that open it to question Alec's character and possible motives? No. No, but there's a possibility of perhaps going for Alec's character in his trial if the door is open for it. Generally speaking, character evidence is not allowed unless there's a door open for it. Sandy, thank you so much for gifting 5 more Legalbytes memberships. Let me take a look at who was gifted. On the ground, Lupe. Galadorn, NPC I'm Not, Debbie Bailey. You have all been gifted memberships by Sandy. So welcome or welcome back to Bite Club. And thanks again, Sandy. That was really kind of you. And Annalie Finch, thank you so much for the super sticker. Very, very kind of you. Okay, back to it.
When you receive evidence for latent print exams, what factors do you consider prior to starting your examination?
I look at what type of evidence it is. It could be a porous item, which means it's like paper, money, or cardboard. I also look if it's semi-porous, which is kind of a shiny cardboard, or if it's non-porous, which is smooth or shiny, like aluminum, plastic, glass. So I look at what type of evidence it is to determine what chemicals or light sources I'm going to need. And then I look at the condition of the evidence. Is the evidence broken? Is it shattered? Is it dirty? Is it covered with something? Or was it previously processed in the field by a crime scene investigator? I look at all that in order to determine what exams I will do and how I will proceed with those exams.
Great. I'm going to show you what was previously marked as State's Exhibit 63. And let's. Do you recognize that photograph?
Yes, I do.
Have you actually seen the original version of what that photograph demonstrates before?
Yes, I have.
All right. And where did you see that?
I saw that back at the FBI laboratory in Quantico, Virginia.
All right. And did you examine Exhibit 63 for latent prints?
Yes, I did.
All right. What specific examinations did you conduct on this item?
So this item of evidence is an ammunition box, and it's semi-porous, meaning it's shiny paper, but it also has non-porous qualities. So the first examination I do is simple visual examination, looking to see if there's any visible prints. You do this every day when you see fingerprints on your cell phone or on a garage door or a mirror. That's a visual examination. So I first do that exam. And then I take this box into a dark room where I have a green light or a laser, a blue light or an ultraviolet light, and I shine that light on the object while I'm wearing orange or yellow goggles to see if any prints may fluoresce. At this point, I've used no chemicals on this item. The next process I use is called superglue fuming, where I place this item in a chamber, I hang it in a chamber, and then in the chamber, I heat superglue at a high temperature. The superglue starts to fume. It starts to appear like white fumes. Those fumes adhere to any kind of moisture that might be on that object, and it creates a white print. And I can either see that print visually, or I need a reflective ultraviolet light to be able to see those prints. Then I also do a magnetic powder right after that process. The magnetic powder is black since it's the white box, so it's contrasting. And I can see if there's any visible prints that way. The black magnetic powder adheres to the white superglue prints. And then I take this box and use a chemical called indane-dione, INDANEDIONE. This is a chemical that is sprayed on the item, and then it is placed in a humidity chamber where a chemical reaction is sped up. This chemical develops any kind of amino acid that may be in your sweat, and it creates a pink or orange print. And I can see that print either visually or in a dark room with a light source. And finally, I take a fluorescent dye stain and I spray this orange chemical on this box, and it adheres to those superglue prints as well. And I can see those prints in a dark room with an ultraviolet light or a laser.
And just to be clear, you did all of that. You did all of those tests with regard to the box that's in this photograph, correct?
Yes.
All right. And what was the result of your testing?
On this box, I developed 10 latent fingerprints.
All right. Did you compare the latent prints that you detected on Exhibit 63 to the known prints of any individuals?
Yes, I did.
Which individuals did you compare those known prints to?
I compared these prints to Hannah Gutierrez, Sarah Zachary, David Halls, and Alec Baldwin.
And did you find a match?
Yes.
Who did you find a match for?
2 of these latent prints were identified to Hannah Gutierrez.
All right. And were you
What's interesting though is that she didn't even compare it to Seth Kenny. I feel like the defense is going to come in on cross-examination about that.
able to find matches to any of the other known samples?
No.
All right. And were you able to exclude any of the other individuals based on your test?
The remaining prints were excluded as being prints from Sarah Zachary, David Halls, and Alec Baldwin.
Thank you. Did you also examine a second ammunition box as part of this case?
Yes,
Does this appear to be a photograph of that box?
it is.
All right.
Can you give us the exhibit number?
Oh, I apologize. This is State's Exhibit 48. Where did you see this box prior to today?
At the FBI laboratory in Quantico, Virginia.
All right. And did you examine this box for latent prints?
Yes, I did.
And did you conduct the same type of analysis that you did on the previous box?
Yes, the examinations I conducted on this box were the exact chemicals, light sources, and powders that I used on the previous box.
Great. And what was the result of your examination of this box?
There were 3 latent fingerprints detected on this box.
All right. And were you able to compare those latent prints to the known samples of any individuals?
Yes,
And who were those folks?
I compared the 3 latent fingerprints to Hannah Gutierrez, Sarah Zachary, David Halls, and Alec Baldwin.
And did you find any positive matches for any of those individuals?
There were no identifications.
Were you able to find any exclusions?
Yes, Sarah Zachary and Alec Baldwin were excluded from the 3 latent prints detected on this item, and Hannah Gutierrez and David Hall were inconclusively compared to these prints.
All right. So just to be clear, Sarah Zachary, you didn't find her fingerprints on this box whatsoever.
The 3 latent prints were excluded from being Sarah Zachary.
Great. Is it possible to touch an item and not leave a latent print?
Yes,
And what kind of circumstances might that occur?
there are several circumstances where you can touch an item and not leave a latent print. First of all, you could be wearing gloves or a mitten, and when you touch an object, you may not leave a latent print because your skin is not having contact with that object. You may have too much sweat or too little sweat on your hand, and that may not leave a latent print. The surface itself may be dirty or textured, and it's difficult to leave a latent print on a dirty or textured surface. The print may be on a surface where if it's overhandled, such as if I put my hand here, the next person comes and put their hand here, someone at the end of the day puts another hand here, it's overhandled, and that could wipe away any prints that may be on an item. There's also environmental conditions, wind, rain, snow, heat and humidity. Those can all play a factor of whether a latent print is detected on an item.
And did you attempt to do any examination of cartridge casings in this case?
Yes,
And what was the result of that examination?
I examined 4 cartridge cases, and there were no suitable latent prints detected on those cartridge cases.
And is it unusual for you to be unable to identify a latent print on a cartridge casing?
It is not unusual.
And why not?
Cartridge cases, when they go through a firearm, there's a lot of heat and friction, and that can destroy a latent print. Also, it's a very small surface that's on a cartridge
interesting.
case, so leaving a suitable print can be difficult. And it's also a smooth surface, so any kind of movement that comes into contact with a cartridge case may destroy a print on a cartridge case.
Have you worked on any other cases where there were a large number of cartridge casing rounds that you attempted to examine for latent prints?
Yes, I have.
Can you give us an example of a case where you worked and then and explain to us based on the number of casings that you found, how many actually were found to contain latent prints?
A case that I have been a part of was the Las Vegas shooting several years ago, where there was a significant amount of firearms, ammunition, and magazines in that case. Specifically to the ammunition, which consisted of shot shells as well as cartridges. We processed and examined over 6,900 pieces of ammunition, where we only detected 26 prints on those 6,909 ammunition. That's 0.38%. So it's a very low chance of developing prints on ammunition. We also processed firearms in that case. We processed about 40 firearms in that case, and we detected prints on 12% of those firearms. And then we processed over 180 magazines in that case, and we only detected prints on 9.7% of firearms. So it's a very
That's
low
good
chance
context.
of getting prints on firearms or ammunition based on the size of the item, the texture of the item, as well as overhandling of those items. Those are all reasons why there's a low recovery rate on firearms and ammunition.
Oh, sorry. So that's a good explanation, first of all, as to why there wouldn't be prints on there, just because of the heat, the friction, all that kind of stuff. And then, tying that into another case where they had a ton of ammunition, they were able to retain some prints from them, but it was like 12% of the overall like rounds and cartridges and magazines and whatnot that they looked at. So very, very small amount. And when you're just testing a much, much smaller amount, the likelihood of finding some with suitable identifiable DNA, not DNA, but fingerprints on them is unlikely. So that's interesting.
Thank you. And the 4 cartridge casings that you attempted to do fingerprint examination in this case, on your notes, does it indicate what the source of those cartridge casings was?
I'd have to refer to my notes for the specific source of those cartridge cases.
Do you mind?
May I?
Yes.
I don't have a specific source. I just have the Santa Fe Sheriff's Office item number.
Do you mind providing that?
It's item 144.
Okay, thank you. I have nothing further.
Cross-exam.
Ma'am, good morning.
Good morning.
With regard to your work, when you compare a Latin print against a standard, you were given those standards from the agency. For example, here, the sheriffs, correct?
Yes.
So here you had 4 people as standards. Is that correct?
Yes.
And that was Mr. Halls, Sarah Zachary, Alec Baldwin, and Hannah Gutierrez-Reed. Is that right?
That's correct.
Okay, so one of those people you did not receive standards
Seth Kenny.
from is a guy named Seth Kenny, correct?
Correct.
And so of all the other people on the set, the only 4 you received standards from were those 4.
That is correct.
Okay. And those standards included Latin prints, fingerprint cards, and DNA.
The standards I received were fingerprints and palm prints from Gutierrez, Zachary, and Halls, and I only had a fingerprint card for Alec Baldwin.
Okay, you didn't have a palm print for him?
I did not.
Now, I know that you had stated that Halls and Hannah Gutierrez-Reed, Mr. Halls and her prints were not completely rolled, or they were over-rolled?
Correct. Their known standards were not complete. There was some over inking in one area. And when a fingerprint card is fully rolled, it's usually from nail to nail where you can get the whole finger. This case, on some of these standards, the finger wasn't fully rolled completely. Therefore, I did not have enough information to do a conclusive comparison.
So
Well,
when
that's
you
not
don't have
helpful.
that completely rolled from the agency submitting to you, it's difficult for you to do a conclusive comparison.
It does make it difficult.
Okay. And that was the case here with Ms. Gutierrez-Reed and with Mr. Halls.
Yes, it was.
With regard to the prints that you were able to conclude, and you indicated Ms. Gutierrez-Reed's prints were found on one of the boxes.
That is correct.
Now, you were able to conclusively do that because?
I was able to conclusively do that because some fingers had that comparable area. So if there was an area that I can compare completely, I can make that conclusive decision. And in those 2 identifications, I was able to conclusively compare and make an identification.
And with regard to the other box that we saw, you found 3 Latin prints.
That's correct.
And you indicated that Ms. Zachary and Mr. Baldwin were excluded, correct?
Correct.
And that Mr. Halls and Ms. Gutierrez-Reed were inconclusively compared. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And that was because, again, you told the jury that you didn't have a complete, well-rolled set of fingerprints.
That is correct.
All right. And that would have been something the agency, the sheriffs would have provided?
Those standards came directly from the sheriff's office.
Did anybody ever communicate with you? And was there communication regarding we need new fingerprint standards?
There was no communication. In my report, I indicated that if further comparisons needed to be conducted, that standards would have to be submitted.
In your report, and if you need to refer to it to refresh your memory, you did not conduct fingerprint analysis on items 4 through 7 and item 13.1, correct?
I'd have to refer to those specific numbers.
Absolutely.
You said 4 through 7?
4 through 7 and 13.1, 13-1.
I did not conduct examinations on those items.
Okay. So the ones that you conducted it on, we've seen today.
Yes.
Okay. Now, with regard to the case you worked on, the Las Vegas shooting, you talked about the low percentage and the ability to recover prints from fired cartridges, correct?
From all types of ammunition.
Okay. Now, with regard to unfired ammunition, they don't go through that heat of the barrel, correct?
That is correct.
And so does that make it more likely prints can be found on those cartridges?
The same percentage refers to that as well, less than 1%. It's due to overhandling of cartridges or shot shells, the surface, the smooth surface, and a variety of other reasons that it could be a low chance of recovering prints on unspent cartridges.
On unspent cartridges, okay, but it is possible, even very low possibility, it is possible to recover them.
It is.
Okay. And you have listed there's certain elements that might come into that, like overhandling, that kind of thing. For example, the box you said earlier, that was handled by another unit?
The box, what specific box are you
Oh, I'm
talking
sorry,
about?
not the box. I was talking about, you mentioned in your report that there was some overhandling and one of your employees came up as contributing 8 fingerprints to one of the items.
Correct. One of the boxes was sent to the firearms unit first, which is usually on the latter end of examinations when it flows to the laboratory. But this box came in, it was specifically for that unit. And then after the firearm examinations were conducted, the request was to do latent prints. So it was kind of backwards in order. Therefore, this item of evidence was handled by the firearms unit, and a firearms employee was identified on that box.
And that was 8 of the prints out of a total of 10 or 11 were the employee, right?
8 out of 10 were identified to an FBI laboratory employee.
And ideally, that should have gone to you first.
In a regular case, the evidence is usually where it goes to a unit that can have less destructive examinations on it to more destructive. That's how it kind of moves to the laboratory. And this box initially went to the firearms unit first.
Thank you, Your Honor. No further questions.
Really quick. Some questions here. Mandy, what's the purpose of this? Of course, Hannah's prints are going to be on the ammo and guns. So the prosecution is showing that it's just her prints. It's no one else's, although it does not help the accusation that Seth Kinney planted those rounds. Right. So the fact that they were not compared to Seth Kinney's prints is a little bit of a gap in the state's case on that. Oh, geez, cat. Okay, no pressing on any keys here, please. So that's the whole purpose in that. You know, of course, the armorer's prints are going to be on the ammo and on the guns. Of course, no, I don't think anyone would really disagree with that. But you know, that's what the state is trying to go for. Harry Funmaker, interesting comment. They can't make this lady look incompetent. I agree. There's no making her look incompetent, but keep in mind that the cross-examination isn't just undercutting the witness that's in front of the jury at the moment. It's about pointing out potential flaws in the either in the testimony or in the underlying investigation that impacted what this person did. So here it's you know, she's relying on what was handed to her. And one of the things that I love about this defense team on cross-examination is that they do a really good job of pointing out flaws and pointing out problems with the investigation and with, with various aspects of the state's case without assigning blame or shame to it, so that, you don't need to make it personal in order to point out that there's an issue here. And so with this witness, you've got someone who on cross-examination is perfectly willing to say, like, yeah, that's potentially, XYZ is potentially an issue, because she's a professional and it's not her fault. So she's totally willing to agree with that. So yeah, so that's another aspect here that is very very, very helpful, because it then also you're less likely to piss off the jury and make them dislike you as a person. That can also impact the case sometimes. And it's also proof that, like, you don't have to be super dramatic to be a trial attorney, to be an effective cross-examiner, right? All you have to do is ask the right questions in the right way, and to show proper restraint with your questions from time to time. So anyway, so that's some interesting points here with this cross-examination. Okay, let's continue on.
I
Redirect.
just have one quick question for you. Mr. Bowles mentioned items 4 through 7 and 13-1. Can you tell the jury why you weren't able to perform a print comparison on those cartridges?
I do not. Are they cartridge cases? I don't have them in my report, so I never received those items.
Okay, fair enough. Thank you.
All right, you're excused. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Honor.
We're going to take our lunch break now.
Okay.
All right, so be back downstairs at 12:30. Please don't talk among yourselves or
Okay.
anyone else about the evidence received here in court. Thank you. Take your tablets with you.
All rise for the jury.
So lunch until 12:30. Just want to make sure that there's nothing interesting going on between the parties in front of the judge. Jury is leaving. As always, jury leaves first, and then everybody else can go and have lunch. And is that it?
We're in recess.
Okay. And then that's it. So lunch until 12:30 Mountain Time. That means I'm looking at my chart here. Okay. So we've got 45 minutes. 45 minutes for the until the afternoon session. So with that, let me just double check that I've got all of the questions here. I think I've got everything. I apologize if there's any questions that I've missed. I try to keep a lookout for them. But I think I got everything. Yeah. So 45 minutes from now about is when we'll have the afternoon session. And so what we'll do is what we've done the first 2 days of this trial: morning session, afternoon session, 2 separate live streams. Yeah, so but once I end this stream, it's going to redirect directly into the next stream. So if you guys want to hang out and keep the window open, it'll be right there, or you can always come back for it. I'm going to put some social media posts as well, so that hopefully you can find the link for it if you don't follow the redirect, or if for some reason the redirect drops you. But yeah, I think that's about it for now. Thanks so much for watching with me, guys. I hope you choose to come back in the afternoon. That'd be wonderful. Okay, guys, have a wonderful quick break for 45 minutes, and I'll see you guys in the afternoon. Bye.